the Jesus Culture Podcast. This week, we'll find out what Christmas gift Banning's mom has given him every year since he was a child. We'll talk with a guy who leads Bible studies and does relationship building from Hollywood to Bollywood. Hear the behind-the-scenes story of the time Chris Kilala was asked to sing with his childhood hero, and on People Doing the Stuff, Andy Bird will talk about what he's doing to display the extravagance of Jesus to people groups who have never even heard of Jesus. All that and much more on the all-new Jesus Culture Podcast.
Welcome to the Jesus Culture Podcast, Episode 3. That's right, you heard that correctly. If you've been a long-time listener, we're on Episode 3, which doesn't fully make sense because we've been doing this for years, but we've officially dropped the L. It's no longer the Jesus Culture Leadership Podcast, but the Jesus Culture Podcast. We will be doing stuff with leadership soon. And Becky, you're really the one that came up with the L, and so that was kind of your claim to fame. It was your claim to fame. Are you kind of wandering aimlessly in life now, wondering what it all means?
I really do.
What you can really claim?
Without hashtag JCLP, I don't know who I am, really.
Yes.
And JCP just doesn't have...
JCP. So hopefully we're going to help you in 2018 find once again your contribution to this ministry, because the one contribution you had, the JCLP, is now no longer.
I was listening to a podcast we did not that long ago, and you called me. You're like, "Yeah, you're just my funny sidekick." That's what I am to you on this podcast.
You're that one actor or actress that's the humor relief. You know, the comedy relief. That's what you are in the thing.
Come on.
I know. There's got to be more. Listen, we got to jump into this episode, but yes. I actually, when I was at Bethel on staff for years, we did these video announcements, and it was me and this guy named Dan Fairley, and they were super funny and all this stuff. And I was like running Jesus Culture. We were impacting the world, holding conferences all over the place. I was a youth pastor for years, and still anybody ever knew me at the church was like, every time I said, "Hey, you're the video announcement guy, aren't you? Hey, you're the video announcement guy."
That's me. I don't do video announcements anymore, but for the first couple years of our church,
yes,
I was the video announcement.
You're the video announcement.
So I'd meet parents. I'm like, "I'm your kid's youth pastor, right?" I'm like, "Oh, hi," and they're like, "Hey, announcement girl."
Hey, announcement girl.
Like, wow, forget the coffees I'm having with your kid, changing their life. I'm announcement girl.
You're announcement girl. Well, it's great to have you a part of the Jesus Culture Podcast. I am Banning Liebscher, the pastor of Jesus Culture, joined by Becky Johnson, who is the co-host. We have a great, great show in Episode 3.
That's right. With Shawn Bolz.
With Shawn Bolz, and one of our great friends who's just making such an incredible impact, such depth and wisdom to him. And I just love his heart, how he approaches the world. Just was really dropping some incredible nuggets of wisdom. And he's just a great guy too. Just enjoyable to be around. But first, we're going to let you hear another clip from a song that is a little bit of a throwback.
This is like Throwback Thursday.
A little bit of Flashback Friday.
That's right.
Because recently I was listening, I'll go back to our old Jesus Culture stuff sometime in my own prayer time or whatever else. And the New York album, the Live from New York with Martin Smith, is one of my favorite albums we've done. Just so incredible. And I came across a song, which I knew we did, but, you know, kind of like, oh, I forgot we did this song. Mm-hmm. And it was when Martin Smith sang Did You Feel? And if you've been around at all, like we are in the church, Delirious, you know, played an important part in helping shape our worship lives and really encountering God. And Did You Feel the Mountains Tremble was just such a great song. And so Martin Smith starts singing this song, and it's so good. Mm-hmm. But then he turns to Chris and just says, "Chris, sing the second verse." And Chris goes into the second verse. And I just, in my room, just like, this is one of the best moments of all time.
Good. You're making me want to listen to it right now.
It's so good. I just talked to Chris the other day too. And he said, like, Martin, like right before they went up to lead worship, he's like, "Hey, you want to sing the second verse of that song?"
Oh, that's cool.
And like, Chris is a massive... again, we don't get giddy over everybody, but playing with Martin Smith and Delirious, like it was a big deal for our team and for Chris. And so Chris is just like a little kid. Like, so we want you. I just didn't want to experience this again without sharing it with all of our podcast listeners. So we're going to let you hear a clip from that song. Then we will be back to jump into Episode 3 of the Jesus Culture Podcast.
Did you feel the darkness tremble? All the saints join in one song, and all the streams flow as one river to wash away our brokenness. Here we we say, and here we see that God you're moving. The time of jubilee is coming. When young and old return to Jesus. Flame wide the gates, flame wide you heavenly gates. Prepare the way of the risen Lord. Open up the doors, say,
Oh, that's such a good moment. I really do love that album. And I especially, Banning, love the bonus track of that album. I think it's track 16 that plays like an hour after the...
Yeah, no bias there.
No bias, but the bonus track is by my husband.
Listen, Derek, the first time you made an appearance on our album, on the main Jesus Culture album,
Yep.
Derek Johnson himself, and it was a bonus album. He's like a bonus.
Yeah, absolutely. Bonus is a good thing. You love Christmas bonuses. You
And
know.
listen, you're married to him, so this might have gotten a little bit awkward, but a lot of the ladies liked when he started coming on.
Oh, it was so
They
funny.
all had
The blonde hair, blue-eyed. It was like
Yes.
the first blonde-haired, blue-eyed worship leader. of Jesus
wavy
culture. Yeah.
hairs. Yeah, yes. Well, I think my favorite part, I love this song in there, but my favorite part is wasn't even recorded because it was when Derek, we've got 5,000 people and we're going to take the afternoon session and just do a prayer meeting. It's going to be worship and prayer, kind of harp and bowl stuff. They're going to do some worship. We're going to do some prayer, and everybody's there. And Derek's supposed to lead it. And like an hour before he gets up to lead it, he finds out he has no band.
Yeah, the band had to do a photo shoot.
Yeah, which is so random. I look back, I'm like, who scheduled a photo shoot in the afternoon at a conference? But so the band had to go do a photo shoot. So they're like, hey, we're not with you. He's like, what? So he has to get up on stage in front of 5,000 people and lead 2 hours
of acoustic
with
worship.
him on an acoustic guitar.
And it wasn't like, acoustic worship's great when you're in like a coffee shop or a small little venue. Or
There
it's
was
like
an
intimate,
arena.
but
It was Nassau Veterans Coliseum on
he
Long
looked
Island.
so tiny.
Oh, it was amazing. But honestly, one of my favorite moments, first of all, I just fell in love with Derek at a deeper level because of just his heart just to go and just serve and just jump in and do it. But it was powerful. Like it was a powerful 2 hours. It's funny because I think sometimes I remember years ago, because of some circumstances, we always had lights and we were starting to spend, as our conferences grew, we got to spend more money on lights. And then one year we just had no lights. It was just like these couple park cans. And I remember nothing changed at the conference. Like it was just so powerful and God showed up. And I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, these lights don't matter.
At all, right?
And it's so funny. There's so many things that we think make the moment. And at the end of the day, hungry hearts, people passionate to worship, doesn't matter. One of my favorite worship times of all times for me, we were at a guys retreat in youth group. I was youth pastoring. It was cold outside. It was like at a campground. So we went into this bathroom and just crammed. It was a larger bathroom, but we crammed everybody into this bathroom, this guy's bathroom at this campsite.
Wow.
And had a guy on acoustic guitar. And it was one of the most powerful times of worship I've ever had. Everyone was just going for it. So I just love it. So yes, we all love Derek, and We Belong to You is a great track on that.
We belong to you. I belong to you.
We Belong to You. I don't even know the name of the song. Love that song. Great song about everybody belongs here. Really a great song.
It was a powerful moment.
Yeah, Derek, I
really
love your
good.
song, Everybody Belongs.
That belonging song. Somebody texted Derek the other day and said, bro, listening to, such and such album, I love this song. It's impacted me. This whole really sweet text message, and it wasn't his song.
It wasn't his song. That's when you just take credit
And
for it.
he was like, what should I say? He's like, this is so awkward. I'm like, you got to tell him it's not your song.
No, you just thank you. You just say thank you. That's it. Smiley face. Smiley face, emoji, fist bump. That's all you do.
Do you do
Smiley
that?
face, emoji, fist
Do
bump.
you do that with sermons when people are like, oh man, I love your
Absolutely.
your sermon?
You're welcome.
It's someone else.
You're welcome.
I know the Lord can turn everything to good. He's right there with us through it all. But to be able to sit and say, I sat in my pain and he showed up, I think is so powerful.
You were just listening to Authentic You, a podcast brought to you by the Women of Jesus Culture, which just recently launched off of the Jesus Culture podcast channel and onto its own channel. So if you want to hear more about that podcast, if you want to connect more with Authentic You, if you want to catch all the episodes and make sure you're not missing it, we need you to search Authentic You in the iTunes store, your podcast app, however you listen to podcasts. Search Authentic You and subscribe to that show separately from the current Jesus Culture podcast, because now every month Authentic You will be on its own channel as its own show. It's an incredible podcast. Make sure you share it with the women in your life, girls that you're mentoring, anyone you're connected to, female friends, relatives. It's really encouraging, inspiring content for women everywhere. So make sure you're sharing that, and you yourself are subscribed to Authentic You. Well, this episode is airing December 26th.
The day after Christmas.
So it's like second, what is it?
I wonder how many people are actually going to listen to this podcast on December 26th.
They're going to be shopping, because everybody goes shopping the day after Christmas.
Why?
Because you return all your presents and then you buy cheaper stuff.
Can I just say something
Our
right now?
society's
Because
messed up.
no, listen, this is what's funny, and my mom's not listening to podcasts, so I'm sure okay. And my mom, and I love her. Like, she just,
She's amazing. Yes.
Isn't that funny? I'm about to say something about her, so you have to qualify the fact that I love my mom. I really do love my mom.
We all do this, but
I'm 41 years old, right? I'm a grown man. I have a kid in college, and I think it was only 2 years ago that I had to ask her to stop buying me clothes. She would buy me clothes at Christmas. and I'm like, and I want to be honest and
Fresh socks.
thank you so much, but I'm not wearing this shirt. And she would try so hard, and I'm like, I'm not 15 anymore. I'm not sure I liked it when I was 15. And CJ, my wife, is the type of person that's like, you do not take a gift back. And you show that you're happy, and then you figure a way out to wear it.
oh, that's funny.
Because she does not want to hurt somebody's feelings, and she's so irritated. And I pretty much tell everybody, hey, whatever gift you're buying me, it's pretty much a gift card.
Oh my
That's what I tell
gosh,
them.
you're terrible.
It's horrible, right? But CJ hates it. But I'm like, thank you very much. And do you mind if I return this? And she hates it. And she also hates that I don't mind if people I'll hand a gift to somebody. I'll be like, hey, just to let you know.
You preface I've watched you give gifts, and you say, hey, just you can return
I
it.
want people, because I don't
Here's
want them
where
to
I
feel
got
awkward.
Here's the receipt.
I don't want people to feel awkward like I do.
Totally.
If you don't like the gift, because again, my big lecture is, I just want to know it's the right gift, you like it, and you'll use it.
Yep.
If you put a smile on your face but you don't really want it or use it, I'm like, go get what you want. That's all that matters to me.
I'm kind of that way too. I like to give gifts that will be used. I hate if it's just something that I know is going to sit. So yeah.
I bought my son. They had these little Razor when they were little, these little Razor scooters. I mean, the ones you sit on, little motorcycles and stuff. And they got too big for them, but they still like doing them. So I actually went and bought them one time for his birthday or Christmas. They have adult size ones. They can hold a 240, 240 pounds or whatever.
Motorized scooters?
Yeah, they're fantastic. They go 14 miles per hour or whatever. And so we rode them around quite a bit, but they've kind of sat the last year or so. They just sit in the garage, not going. And so two of our staff members, Kim and Jessica, just moved in a couple doors down from us. And so they were over, and they're like, wow, look at that. I'm like, go ride them. They're like, that's so fun. And I'm like, you guys you just take them. They're still my sons. So I'm like, just take them. Nobody ever uses them. And now they'll send me pictures of them riding them, and I'm so happy.
Totally.
Just because I just want things used.
Yes.
If you're not going to use them,
it's every father's dream that what he spends his money on gets used.
That's why I preface, and my wife hates it. I preface everything. Hey, here you go. Just to let you know, if you don't like it, you can absolutely return it.
Here's where I got it. Aisle
My
7.
feelings will not be hurt. But she hates that I think that way about gifts that are given to me.
Okay, so let's see what our listeners think about this. Guys, get on Twitter. We're going to have a poll at JC Podcast, and let us know what camp do you fall in? Are you in the Becky and Banning camp of hey, there's no shame in returning a gift. This person wants me to enjoy what they've spent, so I'll return it and get something more
ruins
useful?
the moment. Or are you in CJ's camp, which is we feel so bad that we just don't want to hurt people's feelings, that I'm going to wear something you got me that I don't really want.
That's my husband.
And
that's Derek all day long. Or he'll
do you think it's because they're better people than we are at the end of the day?
I think they're weaker.
They're
people.
weaker. Here's the two options. They're either better than we are or weaker than we are, and we'll let you decide.
So let us know.
The poll will tell us
Let us know. What are you doing on December 26th? Are you enjoying gifts you don't really like? Or trying to enjoy them?
Or going to the store to get what they should have bought you in the first place? Well, one of the new things that we're doing on the Jesus Culture podcast is not only bringing interviews of people like Shawn, but we're also wanting to highlight different people that are doing the stuff in our People Doing the Stuff segment. And my heart really is to both inspire, encourage, and challenge you, not just to talk about what God's called you to, not just to dream about it, but go get your hands dirty and jump in and do something about it. Take a step forward. One of those people that has inspired me greatly in this area is a great friend of ours named Andy Bird, who is both going to reach the unreached people groups in the world and is raising up long-term missionaries to do the same. I was able to sit down with him recently and hear about his heart. And then after that, we're going to hear from our good friend, Shawn Bolz. Hey, listen, I'm just going to jump straight in right now. We're bringing people to the podcast that are not just talking about changing the world, but actually doing it. One of the things you do, you're a full-time missionary. You work with YWAM. And one of your main focuses is reaching unreached people groups. Could you take me on a little bit of a journey of when the Lord put that on your heart and then what you did about that and how you began to engage that call to reach unreached people groups? And maybe even, I'm going to ask you 5 questions, and you can just go. And then maybe also tell us what you mean by unreached people groups.
Totally. No, that's amazing. Maybe I'll start with where things kind of first started for me, at least as a seed kind of planted in my mind and my heart. When I was, I guess I'd have been 15 years old, I ended up going with my church on a trip to the Philippines to work at a camp that was specifically for blind kids. And a lot of these kids, you can imagine, in a place like the Philippines, very much developing world, are completely segregated from society. They're left at home. They're never educated. They're extremely poorly treated. And I had never in my life before seen a people that had so little exposure to love, to the gospel, to even, just common normal things that we kind of take as rights, that they had none of that. And so I wouldn't have had language for it then, but it was the first time I had been around people that were what I would classically, term as unreached. They had no access to the gospel. They had no access to truth or even to a measure of love. And so finishing high school, it wasn't like I was radically pursuing Jesus like I should have been, but those seeds were still there. And when I left Alaska and started to work with YWAM, my first encounters in YWAM as well were in nations like Cambodia and again in the Philippines. And of course, there being some gospel presence in some churches, but again, finding people that maybe never heard the name of Jesus before or didn't, they had no grid. They had no one to tell them, and they wouldn't have known even where to go to look for hope, and yet having, massive hopelessness. So that really is where the seed started to grow in my heart of feeling like we have to do something about this. Reading the Great Commission in both Mark and Matthew and Acts chapter 1, and just realizing that I've grown up with access to the gospel my whole life, and in America you could find it anywhere and everywhere. Anything from a Bible to a Christian to a church. But that there were massive populations in the world that still did not have that access. And so that, of course, has grown over the last, number of years as a passion in our hearts is to do something about those who have had no gospel access, or even if they have a little bit, maybe it's been primarily religious, but the passion of our hearts began to be to display the extravagance of Jesus to places that had no grid, no expression whatsoever of that.
There's a point in your life where you begin to feel the Lord stirring your heart in this, but then you have to make some decisions. What am I going to do? How am I going to go after this thing? It can't just be a seed in my heart. This thing's got to grow. How did that work for you? From going from, wow, I feel a stirring, and was it a big stirring or a small stirring? I mean, not everybody's going to go to the mission field. So many people will be listening to the podcast. They're working in the workplace. But the Lord stirs their heart for certain things. Was it a massive stirring? Was it a small stirring that you just paid attention to and began to kind of nurture and water? How was that process for you? And then what was the decisions you had to make in going after that?
Yeah, that's so good. I'd say really for me, it was both. You know, you have these moments that forever mark you when you're with someone. Those faces are forever etched in your mind or your heart, or those conditions, the conditions that people live in and developing nations, or the hopelessness. And so some of those are real moments that I feel are like seared in my mind or my heart, and you can't forget them. And you know, there's a handful of those we've all had in our lives, no matter where we are or what we're called to, where God has marked us. He's seared something in our hearts and minds. But then I certainly feel it's a combination of that with, you know, just little subtle, you know, little impressions and little faithfulness and a little bit of obedience and, you know, taking little steps forward that we foster that dream or that thing that God has seared on us. So for me, it's really been moments and then just a steady obedience or a steady faithfulness towards those moments and towards that prompting from the Lord. But I think for me, some of the first steps, you know, we're kind of where the rubber meets the road. I remember specifically praying for a very close nation for probably for a year. I had a calendar someone had given me, and I was just so gripped with the beauty of the nation. And as I looked up more about it, how untouched it was by the gospel. And it really came to a day with this specific instance, but I think it's a example of what's happened many times in my life, is I just felt the Lord say, hey, are you just going to pray, or are you willing to go and do more about this? And not that prayer should be diminished, because obviously prayer is a huge part of it, but it was like, are you willing to be the answer to your own prayers? So, you know, that required a ton of action. This nation was so hard to get into. It was $250 a day to be in the country. I knew not a single person in the nation, and you had to go through a government tour guide to even get in the country. It was illegal for me to go in any other way. So the hours and the preparation, and then the thousands of dollars that it cost to get there, and then to be there for even a short amount of time, were all part of the price or the response to not wanting to be someone that, I don't know, died with really good journal entries that were left as journal entries and unfulfilled promises or unfulfilled dreams, but, you know, willing to make the sacrifice necessary to at least put myself out there, at least take a step forward. You know, I think it was said of one of the Jesuit sayings was that they always had 1 foot forward, meaning that they were always leaning into obedience. They were always taking a step towards the promptings of the Lord. And so I think it's really practical. And I look back on those moments ago, those were practical moments where I had to take a step of faith and just kind of take a step forward. And then I'm looking back, I'm always stunned by the doors that God flung open and the ways that he's moved in the midst of that.
Right now, how long ago did the Lord begin to prompt your heart then? Is this, in a real way, 15 years, 20 years?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Right in that window.
And tell people right now what you're doing.
Yeah. So our main, you know, we have several, visions going on simultaneously, of course. But a big part of our heart is to see a whole nother wave of long-term workers launched, you know, short and long-term, specifically to places that don't have hardly any exposure to the gospel. And we'll never walk by a lost person and not want to tell them about Jesus. It's certainly not that. We want everyone to know and everyone to experience, but we are looking at certain places in the world going, oh, there might be one believer per, 100,000 people or 200,000 or even more. And we're looking at those places going, how do we raise up teams that would walk in tremendous community, a real culture like Jesus modeled and taught, and, walk in the power of the Holy Spirit and go to be willing to do the hard work of learning another language, starting a business or some kind of a platform for influence, all with the goal of making disciples and seeing people truly turn to Jesus among people that have, rarely ever heard the gospel. So that's a big part of what we do. Mobilization in the U.S., awakening, so passionate about the United States being awakened as well, but just believing that there is a percentage of people in our nation and nations that are called to actually go to other nations and specifically to places that have not heard the gospel. So we do a lot of training and sending. We've got teams all over the world right now in some of the least reached regions of the world that are just passionately going after the lost and disciple-making movements. And that is one of the greatest joys of kind of what we get to do and see is that occurring in some of these places of the world.
As we wrap up today, just quick 30-second soundbite for us. If somebody says, Andy, I felt a stirring in my heart, I can feel that seed planted. You're 15 years down the road of not just talking about it, but getting your hands dirty with what God's called you to. Andy, I'm starting this journey. I want to go after, lean in. What's your one piece of advice for me as I lean into what God's talking to me about?
This doesn't always happen chronologically or sequentially, but finding the right community, that's going to help nurture that vision, even if it's one or two other people, or whether it's a whole, broader church community. But who are the people that are going to nurture that vision, that dream? And then I just think we have to fully, joyfully embrace failure when it comes to risk and stepping out. And I just know not one of us is going to get to the end of our lives and regret having taken a lot of risks. We're much more likely to look back and go, I played it safe. So I think it's find the community and then ask the question, what are the first steps of obedience, of risk towards this thing that God's placed in my heart? And then just knowing sometimes out of comparison, we don't step out in what we feel is in our heart because we feel like it's less than what somebody else is doing. And that comparison is just straight from the enemy. So I think we just got to know that there in the realm of obedience to God, it's all sacred. Whether it's stepping into starting a new business, or into, impacting a neighborhood, or a certain, going to a whole nother nation, it's all sacred in God. So obliterating comparison is what actually allows us to step into the dreams and take some of those risks too, because we go, it's the word of the Lord. It's not better or worse than anybody else's obedience. It's my obedience, and I'm going to step into it. And then with that community, that's going to help and nurture and strengthen that.
I love it. Listen, I say this and I mean it. You run one of the best schools I've ever been to in just kind of putting a fire inside of people and then sending them. If people are interested in finding out more about that, where do they go?
Yeah, that's awesome. They can couple places you could direct people. One would be ywamkona.org, which is our overall YWAM training center here in Kona, and another would be fireandfragrance.com, and that's the specific school and ministry that we run that is really training and sending people all over the world as well. And so either one of those would be great resources for people that are kind of stirred or feeling to check out more of anything we talked about today.
Fantastic. We'll make sure to have all on the website. Andy, thanks for taking a few minutes with us today and just sharing. We appreciate you that you're out there on the front line doing the stuff. Thanks for encouraging us. We'll make sure to have you on again.
Podcast listeners, we want to see you at our Jesus Culture Encounter Conference in 2018. We are reserving 52 special seats just for you. Come hang out with us in Manchester, UK, or in Sacramento, California. Register at encounter18.com with the code JCPodcast, and you'll get some VIP attention, plus special reserved seating just for you, our podcast family. Again, register at encounter18.com with the code JCPodcast.
Well, it's great to have, as always, one of our good friends on the podcast, someone that's really made a great impact on our lives and is not only impacting the body of Christ worldwide. Are we allowed to say worldwide? We were able to make it bigger. Shawn, I'll have to tell you. Anyways, somebody introduced me the other day. They're like, Banning and Jesus Culture, they're filling stadiums around America. And I'm like, well, more mid-sized theaters.
I love it.
Jesus Culture filling mid-sized theaters all across America. But anyways, someone that's really become a dear friend of ours and made a great impact on us. Really great to have Shawn Bolz on the podcast with us. Shawn, thanks so much for joining us.
I'm so glad to be here.
Now, Shawn, I just was on your podcast, and we were just talking about this off microphone, but I think it took us about an hour to do the podcast simply because my dog barked the entire time.
There was a lot of editing. It was good.
I think you had a power outage at your house or something.
We did. We had an internet outage, a power outage. Yeah, it was a pretty crazy, if we were old school Pentecostals, we would have been like, say now,
Devil, I rebuke you.
Exactly.
Hey, well, listen, Shawn, can you just really quickly give a quick context of who you are and what you're doing? Just a little bit so people know who you are.
Well, apparently I'm having a worldwide impact according to Banning. No, I'm a guy in Los Angeles, California, who has a ministry, and we reach out to people and help them both hear from God all over the world. Like, we're creating kind of a love-based approach to the prophetic that seems to get a lot of traction because we've got a lot of best-selling curriculums and books and that kind of thing. And then also, and I go to all kinds of denominations. This is really fun, like across the board. And then also we do stuff in the entertainment industry. So we actually do Bible studies and ministry and relationship building across industries from anywhere from Los Angeles to Bollywood to Singapore to South Korea, and help people connect for the sake of the kingdom and like actually have really kingdom fruit and impact, not only in film and television, but also in video games and sports and that kind of thing. Those are two kind of main veins. And my wife is a teacher of like more life, self-help, inspirational stuff. So we're kind of going along that kind of vein too, and some stuff we're doing this year.
One of the things that I've been most impressed by you, and I think that you do intentionally, is you operate at an extremely high level when it comes to the prophetic word of knowledge. And you've always had a deep, since I've known you, you've had a high level of hunger, a deep desire to grow in the Lord, to have a depth in your spirituality and holiness, but also super down to earth, super just enjoy life, relatable. I watch movies and play video games. And can you talk to me a little bit about that? Because, and I've told you this in private before, so many people that would operate at the level you do in your gifting or have the level of hunger you have in your life, they're a little bit harder to relate to. That sounds horrible, right? But they're just, they're a little bit harder to relate to just in normal life. This is something that you've done really well. And I'm assuming it's intentional, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's just who you are. Talk about why you have a value for that.
You know, it's because I came from a really healthy Christian family, and my parents loved to celebrate fun and life and do the ritual family well. And when you have that in your background, when the prophetic comes on you, then it's just part of that. It's not, I don't have, my substitute life isn't prophetic ministry, and then everything else is secondary on the back burner. I'm not accusing anybody else of doing that, but it seems like a lot of people who pioneered the prophetic, at least, came from a lot of rejection or a lot of abuse or a lot of just sort of disabled lives, and the sense of emotional intelligence and family connection and those kinds of things. So when they came into the church, a lot of times there was a level of brokenness that came along with a level of gifting. And, you know, my whole life, my parents have been going after, like, how do we become the healthiest version of ourselves? And me and my wife are coined the term, let's be the best version of ourselves in all areas. And so the area that I carry it the worst in is my physical health in the last 10 years or so, just because we've had 2 babies in the last 4 years, and I got pregnant with my wife. It was terrible. But the place I think I carry it really well is socially and relationally. Like, I really value people. And so I want the person who's, whether it's a Facebook response, which I don't do a lot of on my own, or a podcast response or something, or if it's a personal contact at the airport or event, or I get, I'm like a D-list Christian celebrity, but I still get recognized all over. And so people come up to me at like restaurants and coffee shops all the time. And people who come up to me because they know I hear from God, they ask me. It's not like when you go and see a famous person, you're like, hey, I want a picture with you. People literally, when they see me, they're like, my the brother's been missing for 5 years. Do you have any revelation? They ask me the most gut-wrenching, hard questions. I'm going through divorce. Is there any hope? You know, my wife has cancer. Is she going to die? Like, people ask me really hard questions. So they put me in a place in a space that's probably awkward. And if I didn't have that family background with that, or backbone even, with healthy relationships, then I probably would get pretty dysfunctional.
Okay, I was going to talk to you about the prophetic, but let's go down this road a little bit. Why is it so important to be healthy, emotionally healthy, spiritually healthy? Why is it so important to be healthy? Man, this is because, again, there's nobody I'm thinking of. But you do encounter some people that are really powerful in the spirit and are just dysfunctional and not healthy emotionally or relationally. Yeah. Why is it so important to be emotionally, relationally, physically healthy? And why is the Lord seem to have been highlighting that in the context of even some of the spiritual giftings?
I'm a quasi-popular culture self-proclaimed psychologist. Just kidding. But I mean, I study psychology on the side and neurology, and I just can't help it. And I would get my degree if I had time. But I believe it's because basically, like, God gives us these commandments: love Him and love ourselves and love our neighbor as ourselves. And if you don't love yourself, you can't love the world in a great way. You can't consistently fulfill the role of love to other people and to God, because there has to be healthy identity. And identity really does come out of a place of not self-serving, but there's a place of self-connection and self-love that has to happen with identity. So if you have healthy identity, then you can contribute to the world in a much more transformational way than if you don't have healthy identity. And so for me, if you're healthy, you're actually operating out of a healthy operating system that actually benefits yourself, your own peace, your own happiness, and the world around you. And I have nothing against people on anxiety medicine or on whatever, like on ADHD medicine, whatever. But when you come into a place, the more emotionally healthy you get, and the more in your system, your physical body you get, the more self-love you apply to your emotions, your spirit, your body, the more at peace with yourself and with the world you'll get, the more mature you get. I remember someone defined to me spiritual maturity was being at peace with the world and yourself. And at the time I was in politics, and not in natural politics, but cared more about church politics and about spiritual crap than I cared about good stuff. I cared about the mission of, saving the world from the enemy more than I cared about dwelling in the goodness of God, and I've changed so much through the years, but I think people who are emotionally healthy and spiritually healthy, they exude an atmosphere around them where you just love being around them, because you're just like, this feels like it contributes to my world, my environment.
Shawn, when you speak and teach, you talk a lot about the stuff that you do, prophetic ministry in general. You talk about walking it out in love and the importance that in everything we do, we are doing it in love. And, you're sharing in an environment out in Hollywood, the entertainment industry in Southern California, that can be a pretty divisive world, not in unity. Just our world in general can be so divided in everything that we're seeing in politics, the social climate. How are you navigating what you're doing in the environment that you're in? And how are you doing that in love, doing the prophetic in love, encountering these people with very different opinions from you? How are you walking all of that out in love?
Very carefully. No, I think I'm looking for the place of balance. Like we've had, Banning, you would know this, we've had you may not know the number, we've had over 80 pastors' kids be a part of our church that I planted. And so from all different movements. And pastors' kids, most of them had a chip on their shoulders, or they had some dysfunction or some family stuff they just had to come with and get rid of. Some came really healthy. Like even our main pastor there now, Hona, he's a pastor kid who's really healthy, always has been. But for the most part, what I learned from that is if you didn't bring a place of balance that was healthy and normal, they would react to the extreme. The whole church culture would be like, ew, this is hype, this is fake, or this is too Pentecostal, it's too weird. It's we can't relate to it. How do we use this in everyday life, and how does it apply? And it came to a place when I was young, I was seeing all this stuff happen in the church, and I wasn't sure how much of it was God or not, because people, I never fell down. I'd be the last person standing in revival meetings, And I was like, I need to know if my faith, because I would hear God, but I need to know if my faith can translate outside of church culture. I just had this thing inside of me where it's I had this value for people that even if they have conflicting belief systems from me, they're made in God's image, and I need to respect who they are, even if I don't agree with them. Even if I don't agree with their lifestyle, their theology, whatever it is, I need to have a basic honor in my heart that who cares about the original sin that they represent or whatever. They're not my enemy. They actually represent a piece of God's heart. So I have to value that piece and learn how to place that in my world somewhere. So when I started going out I started going not back to the church trying to build the church in a greater way. I was actually trying to engage culture and see if my religious upbringing could affect the culture around. And so I started going after things like, at that time, extreme social issues, and I'd go to dumps and jails and places where there's slavery and whatever, like leper colonies, and just see if God would show up. And he did. And I was like, oh, wow, no one has a context for me here. I have no reputation. There's no gifting I'm relying on. I'm just showing up and thinking, will your love be enough? If I show up, will you show up in these places? And he would. And then I started to look at what's the long-term transformation steps, because this is good that there's some spiritual breakthrough, but how do we get long-term transformation? And the only way that I could see that is through the context of seeing what God originally intended through loving people in the way that God dreamed of each person, each region, each city, each industry for millions of years before it was ever created, or eternity, because he's eternal. And that I just treat it like it has redemptive value and purpose. So I treat people like they're already hearing from God. I treat people like they already have a relationship with God. I treat people, if they tell me that they feel spiritual, I believe them. I don't go, well, you're not a Christian, so you're not really spiritual. I just look at it and go, you know what? They are spiritual. They may not be saved. They may not be, their trajectory may not be like heaven bound, but I'm going to treat them like they are. Because Jesus treated everybody around him like, my Father's building rooms in heaven for you right now. Like, you're awesome. And they weren't even believers. So I'm trying to model that place of inclusion and belief towards humanity into God's dream.
How does the prophetic play into everything you just said? Again, so much of the prophetic that you operate in, many people would know the prophetic if they grew up in charismatic Pentecostal circles as the person who stands up at the service and saying, "Thus saith the Lord." With your heart, your desire to interact at the level you're talking about in the world, where does the prophetic play into all of that?
Well, the prophetic should feel like, the Holy Spirit, the word of the Holy Spirit is comforter, friend, counselor, wise one, those kinds of things, the spirit of wisdom and revelation. So prophetic should feel like you're meeting with a counselor, a friend, or a comforter, So for me, when I was practicing growing in the prophetic, because it's never been like, you're just gifted, it's just happened. I've always been intensely pursuing hearing God's voice, especially things like words of knowledge, which is current or past revelation or information about somebody that God's speaking about. So, there was a point when he started to speak to me more with words of knowledge, like where it was a before and after moment. But all my life, I can look back and see times that I would hear, people's names and birth dates and things about their lives that were significant and where contracts were in their deaths, that kind of thing. Like I had those, they just weren't as frequent as they are now. But I would pursue God and say, God, one prophetic word, one time of hearing from you can take someone's 15 counseling appointments. It could speed them up into one moment, One time of meeting with you can take like 10 doctor's appointments and solve the problem in a second. And you speak because you love us, and it applies an accelerated grace to our lives where we see who you are, we see your thoughts for us, and we believe them for real. Like we partner our faith maybe for the first time in what your intentions are towards us. And it can happen for an industry or a region or a city or a person. So I've always pursued the prophetic as a way to show that God's kingdom is advancing and that God cares about everybody who's here and everything that's happening, that he's present. Like he's not just God is watching us from a distant Bette Midler song. He's actually the God who's here now. And prophecy shows that. It proves it.
How do you talk to people about, when it comes to the prophetic, not wanting to use it just as a flashy gift, but there's, to impress people or to be, wow, that was fun or that was cool. I've even seen it in some of your meetings. We've had you at our church. And again, I get it. It's pretty amazing when God is talking to people at that level, but not as much like the cool parlor trick that people are doing. How do you talk to people about, if you really want to walk in the prophetic, you got to kind of work out some of that in your heart?
Yeah, it's one of those divine tensions, because I never wanted to be a poster boy for public modeling of the prophetic. I like the behind the scenes, the one-on-one, the person who doesn't know you at all, and it comes up and they're like, oh my gosh, God just spoke to me, and they didn't know that was possible. Like, I love those kinds of times. But I felt like God said, I want you to model something, and I want you, and sometimes when you prophesy publicly, it creates an atmosphere around faith where people are like, wait, if God talks that way to that person and loves that person like that, what does he think about me? Now, sometimes it creates a pushing in or a hunger for the person's gift who's prophesying. Of course, that's a byproduct sometimes. But it also creates that expectation that I always say it like, if God can use me, he can use anybody. If he can speak to me, this is a developed gift. I've prayed for this for years. Yes, he's gone past what I prayed for, but it started with me pursuing him for this. I wasn't born under a sign. I wasn't like some of these guys who'd had visitations at the age of 9 and knew they were a prophet. I just said, God, I want to hear your voice because it changes people's opportunity in life. I want to be a part of that, So for me, it's like I'm modeling something, and when you're trying to model it, I'm not trying to gain a reputation or trying to impress people. My goal is that people walk away and go, the God of all the universe who's omnipresent chose to be present with that person in the meeting. And that's how real God is. He's that cool. He's so amazing. He's so beautiful. Like, I cry over some of the stories that after I'll view them again sometimes afterwards. My team will play me a video from one of our conferences, and I'm like, wasn't that amazing? And we'll like cry over a resolution that God brought through a prophetic word that could have never been resolved in any way because it's a spiritual issue, So I think it models to people what they can do in everyday life. But I do think that there's some people who forget the everyday life because they come into the culture of professional ministry or, they're trying to pursue it in a way that's not practical anymore. It's not meeting the needs of the world they're in. They're trying to get into a bigger world, and that's when it becomes a little dangerous, because then you're only as valuable as the gifting you produce. My value isn't in the gifting. I could stop prophesying tomorrow, and I still know I'm a son of God and so worthy. And so, I love who I am. And so it's not tied into the prophetic. That can stop, and I would still have a great life.
Shawn, can you quickly tell people how they can find out more about you and where they can connect with you, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook?
Absolutely. My name is ShawnBolz, as in zebra. And we have a podcast called Explain the Prophetic on the Charisma Podcast Network, which is anywhere podcasts are. And then also bolzministries.com. And we have all kinds of resources and fun stuff we're doing.
Yep. In fact, and we're going to be giving away, we'll let you know about this, but you just came out with a book called God's Secrets, A Life Filled with Words of Knowledge. And we're going to be giving some of those away to listeners. So we'll make sure to post all of this online as well, how you can connect with them.
Yes. And then real quick, give us a synopsis of the book.
Yeah, it's the only book on words of knowledge. It's not just about words of knowledge. I think it's about understanding how to think and share the same headspace with God. It says in 1 Corinthians 2, the last verse, we have the mind of Christ. So what did it look like when Solomon said, God, he didn't just ask for discernment. He said, I want to think and process the way you do as a king over my kingdom. So give me your processor. And God was so impressed with it that he became the most powerful man in ancient history. And I believe God's doing it again, where he's saying, I'm giving you my mind, think thoughts with me. And out of those thoughts, words of knowledge come. And the neurology of heaven's being given to us. So it's a really fun book.
Oh, I love that. The Neurology of Heaven. I will sign up for that. I'll get that book. You guys can get that online, and we're going to do a fun giveaway for your book, Shawn, on our social media.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Shawn. We appreciate you being on with us.
That wraps episode 3. It feels so weird saying episode 3 because we've been doing this for so long. But that is episode 3 of the new and improved Jesus Culture podcast. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Hope you enjoyed this episode. As always, leave a review on iTunes. That really helps us out. And we will be back in 2 weeks with our very own Kim Walker-Smith. It's going to be a good episode. We'll see you guys later.